first, have to start with the big news out of Los Angeles, not with the Lakers, with the Clippers. Kawhi Leonard, it came out when it was reported yesterday that he has just suffered a partially torn ACL. This is huge news for the Clippers, huge news for the NBA. And this is the one thing that we've known about the Clippers throughout this postseason. And especially when Kawhi Leonard went down, he missed the final 8 games of the postseason. But throughout that entire process, it was very opaque, very vague. The Clippers were kind of giving us mixed messages, giving us day-to-day updates. It was a lot left to innuendo and speculation. And there weren't many concrete statements being made by the Clippers throughout this entire postseason. And now we see why. Because now it's a partially torn ACL. And clearly these headlines would have distracted from what the team was accomplishing, from the preparation of the Utah Jazz, from the preparation of the Phoenix Suns. Obviously, the Clippers knew that Kawhi Leonard wasn't going to be playing, wasn't going to be returning. And the reality is a lot of these other teams probably suspected he wasn't going to be returning either. But if you disclose that, well, then you reveal that your player, who's the face of your franchise, isn't returning this postseason. Now, timetables for a partially torn ACL typically last at least 3 months. It's a little bit more favorable than a full torn ACL. It can last anywhere between at least, at the earliest, 3 months, normally about 5 to 6 months. And if it's a fully torn ACL, somewhere between 6 to 9 months. So it was a little bit more favorable to hear that it was a partially torn ACL as opposed to a fully torn ACL, although the Clippers have not released a timeline just yet about his return down the road. But this is one of those rare moments where even as a Lakers fan, I saw myself having to take a step back and just decompress because I was growing quite fond of Kawhi Leonard, especially this postseason. I thought that he was doing a masterful job of guiding this Clippers team through all the turmoil and all the shortcomings of last season. They certainly took the road less traveled by. They took the hardest path this postseason, but he was absolutely destroying it in the playoffs. 30 points, 11 rebounds, over 4 assists on 57% shooting in 11 postseason games. And more importantly, in the games where the Clippers needed him the most. The last 2 games against the Utah Jazz, what did he post? 32.5 points, over 9 rebounds, and over 4 assists. They lose all 3, the first 3 home games against the Dallas Mavericks. Your season's on the line. You have to win in Dallas. And in those road games at Dallas, these are his stat lines: 37 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists, 74% shooting from the floor, 61% from the three-point line. With this team's back against the wall, he came up with his clutchest performances. Lethal from the mid-range, efficient from the three-point range, on the road in the biggest moments of the season. And that's what was super impressive about this team. And now, again, you look at nothing that they were doing was predictable. They kept putting themselves in the most precarious situations, digging the deepest grave possible for them to have to climb out of. And they somehow managed to do it. Again, having to win every road game against Dallas, losing the first 2 against Utah when they had a golden opportunity to split. Even against the Phoenix Suns without Kawhi Leonard. Should have won game 2. You give up a game-winning dunk to DeAndre Ayton. Now you're down 0-2. This team kept putting themselves in holes, but the backbone that they were showing, whether Kawhi Leonard was playing or not, it showed just how far along this team had come. This franchise had turned a corner. This is a Lakers guy saying this Clippers franchise had turned a corner. They were creating history. They were trailblazing their own path, riding all this buoyancy and this momentum going into their new stadium in Inglewood, all this hope, all this optimism. surrounding this franchise. And it's just a shame, and it's just devastating to hear this type of news, and especially at the stage of the season that it took place. Because this team, if the Clippers don't lose Kawhi Leonard, they're the team up 2-1 against the Milwaukee Bucks right now. It's as simple as that. And so when I think about not only the tremendous run that this team was having, not only was the future extremely bright for this team, but you think about the future and now how much more mired it looks, and how much muddy and how much muddier it looks going forward, because you're talking about a Western Conference where Paul George is trying to lead you for the entire season. We've seen that script before with the Indiana Pacers. Now, he's a good player, but we saw how far LeBron James could barely take the Lakers when it was just by himself. Now, they didn't have the same depth as the Clippers, but I don't know if the Clippers are going to be able to retain Reggie Jackson. He's going to command a lot more money than they're probably trying to pay him at this moment in time in his career, and with their salary cap through the roof. I'm not sure if they can retain Reggie Jackson. You're talking about the Denver Nuggets getting Jamal Murray back. Lakers are going to be healthier. Phoenix Suns aren't going anywhere. The Dallas Mavericks will probably make some moves. Say what you want about Portland. They're still a good team, so they're not going anywhere. There are a lot of, even the Utah Jazz are still going to be back and formidable, at least in the regular season. It isn't a surefire bet that the Clippers will necessarily reach the playoffs without Kawhi Leonard. And again, you're talking about potentially missing an entire year depending on the severity of the injury. And so, to be honest, though, with all of that being said, because it is crushing, there is one silver lining. And there is one positive that you can take away from this if you're the Clippers and if you're Kawhi Leonard. There are a couple positives and a silver lining in this. One, it's good news that you hear that it's just a partially torn ACL. So it's not a fully torn ACL, it's a partially torn ACL, which has a little bit more upside, the potential for a faster recovery. Two, if you're the Clippers and you're Kawhi Leonard, well, now you got a better chance of, if you're Kawhi Leonard, of actually staying in LA. If you're the Clippers, he's less likely now to really test out the open market and probably opt in and sign a long-term max contract. So there's a greater chance he's going to remain with the Clippers because of that insurance, because of the fact that he's got that assured, guaranteed money, $36 million in his bank account if he just opts back in, no matter how much time he misses. And then three, what's been the knock about Kawhi Leonard throughout his entire career? It's his ailing, chronic knees. And I think now might be an actual first opportunity to give him an entire off season and even an entire perhaps year to get those knees right. Every single season, there's always question marks going into training camp. Well, how healthy is he? How healthy is he truly? That's always been the question mark. And now he'll have time to kind of fully recuperate, just like Steph Curry. When Steph Curry, right when he got into the league out of Davidson, he had chronic ankle injuries, and then finally underwent a couple surgeries on both ankles, and he was able to move past that. But at first, there were question marks. Could he ever get healthy? Finally took some time to get his body right, go under the knife, and he took care of it. And so maybe if you're Kawhi Leonard and you're the Clippers, this may finally resolve some of these ailing knee issues that really have derailed his previous teams and his own career to a certain extent. So, but crushing news, no doubt, just an absolute shame to see another great player. And again, this is another referendum on a season that unfortunately has been determined by injuries. That's just what's happened. So hoping he can recover well and as quickly as possible.